Okay, let's talk about some spare parts. Spare parts are definitely going to be more of a luxury than a requirement when you first start go-karting. When we first started, we had no spare parts, didn't even have a spare chain. So a lot of this stuff we've just definitely accrued over time. So one thing you're definitely going to want to consider when you're getting when you're buying your chassis is making sure that you do buy a chassis that other guys out at your track are using. So if you're in a situation where you do need a spare part, there's a good chance that someone out at the track is going to have that part that they can sell you. Some of this stuff I would probably recommend that you do get initially. So we'll just go through some of the things here. We've got a spare steering column. I've got a couple spare tie rods, and if you get into a front end incident, those two things like to bend. This is what your tie rods look like when you do bend them. There's definitely no point in trying to straighten this thing out. If you do bend one of these, just go ahead and scrap it. We've got a couple of spare hubs. I got a front hub and a rear hub. And as a matter of fact, this was our primary hub, but we went and broke off one of these lugs, so I'm actually running our spare right now. I should probably get that fixed so that I've got a spare rear hub. I've got a front stub axle. I've actually got one for both sides. I've never bent one of these, so those kind of just sit in the toolbox for a rainy day. Back here I have a spare axle. There will be a time where you're going to bend your rear axle. Fortunately, that you can usually find someone in the area that can straighten these for you. But I've got a spare right there that we can just go ahead and slap on the go-kart out of the track if we need to. Throttle cable. This is something I would probably recommend you get initially. These can fray. They can break on you. They're real cheap, so something I would probably recommend you get initially. Rain tires. Definitely not a requirement, but it's just a matter of time before you're out at the track and it's going to rain on you. And if you don't have a set of rain tires, you're going to have to just call it a day. You're definitely not going to want to go out on a wet track in slicks. And for our local series, they usually have extra points for rain races, so you'd hate to miss out on those extra points. A spare set of rims. I like to have a spare set of rims, that way I've got a set of practice tires and a set of race tires. Makes it real convenient. It makes it nice if you do happen to have an issue with your rim, you could just go pop your practice tires off and use those as your race tires. Got some spare numbers here. These are open wheel go-karts. It's just a matter of time before someone's gonna put a wheel up against your side pod and tear your numbers off. So it's a good idea to have some spare numbers. Spare chain, something else that I would definitely recommend having initially. If you do happen to throw a chain on your go-kart, I would recommend you scrap the chain because it could get tweaked and you're just gonna throw it again. So just go ahead and drop a new chain on there. Spare spark plug, obviously. Here I've got some spare gaskets for our motor. So when we're doing maintenance on our motor, I've got some spare gaskets in the bag that I can just go ahead and slap on, and then once I use those I'll just go ahead and reorder me some so I have them as a spare. Over here we've got a spare fuel filter, some fuel line. When we ran our go-kart the first year, our fuel line was actually tapping up against our exhaust because I had it set up a little too long and it almost burned all the way through, but fortunately someone was able to hook me up with some spare fuel line. Over here we have our air filters, and we run multiple air filters, and I've also got a cover for my air filters, so if it's a rain race I can go ahead and slap this on over the air filter to keep the water from spraying directly onto the air filter. But in a rain race, your air filter is going to get moist, and you're going to want to swap that out if your air filter's got any moisture on it, as well as if you go off the track and your air filter gets caked up full of dirt, you're going to want to be able to swap that out as well, so you've got a nice fresh air filter. I've also got a weight here. Depending on the size of your driver, you may or may not need to add weight to your chassis. I went and picked these up at a local scuba dive shop and just drilled a hole in them, and we mount these to our go-kart. And for whatever reason, when we're out at the track, the scale fluctuates or the weight of my son fluctuates, so sometimes we're pulling a few pounds off, adding a few pounds, so it's definitely nice to have some spare weights on hand. I've got a spare set of brake pads here, and with this 4-cycle motor, we really don't run through brake pads that often, but we recently picked up an X30 motor, and it's absolutely insane how fast you'll chew through your brake pads with that motor. So it's nice to have a spare set of those on hand. In this bag, it looks like I've got some spare bead locks, some locking clips, some other retaining clips. in here. So if you've got a wheel that's leaking air, just go ahead and throw a new bead lock on there. You should be good to go. Nice to have those on hand as well. And here is just a bunch of bolts that I've collected over the years. No way we're gonna go through all these, but looking here on top, I've got a bumper bolt. Those are nice to have. Someone runs into the back of you, cracks your bumper bolt, be able to replace that. Out here on top, I've got a kingpin bolt, for example. Some weight mounting hardware, just a few other things. Bolts tend to wear out, you'll strip them. For example, the bolts that hold your floor pan on, you'll constantly be grinding those off, so you'll want some spare ones of those eventually. But yeah, those are just spare bolts. In this one, I've got spare nuts and washers. We've got some of our wheel nuts. Definitely good to have a spare set of wheel nuts on hand. We've got some threaded bolts here, some random washers, just whatever we need in case something breaks. We can go ahead and patch it up real quick. Make sure our race weekend doesn't end earlier than it needs to. And in this kit right here, this is my carburetor kit. I've got spare parts in here. For example, I got a spare main jet, some clips, some retaining clips. On this side, looks like I've got some spare gaskets. There's our old slide. I've got a spare exhaust gasket there. But yeah, spare parts, like I said, they're real nice to have. As long as you're running a chassis that other guys are running, you could probably get away with it. Someone's gonna have something that you need if you do break something. And you'll just accrue this stuff over time. Say when I bend something and I need to replace it, I'll just go ahead and order 2. That way I've got 1 spare on hand. That's how most of this stuff's gotten here. Just slowly over time, and now we've got all this spare stuff that we can use when we're out of the track. So again, decide what you're gonna wanna get initially, make the investment, and have a great time while you're out racing at the track.